I still remember that winter evening, the one that changed everything. The clock had just struck 7, and the aroma of my old cedar candles filled the house. I was sitting in my favorite armchair, wrapped in my wool shawl, when I overheard them, my son Daniel and his wife Clara, whispering in the kitchen. They thought I couldn't hear, but age sharpens what the young underestimate. "She's getting forgetful," Clara murmured, her tone dripping with concern that didn't quite sound genuine. "It's not safe for her to be alone anymore." My heart tightened. I gripped my teacup so hard I thought it might shatter. Forgetful? Was that what they thought of me now? I had raised Daniel single-handedly after his father passed, worked 2 jobs, walked miles to make sure he never missed school, and now this was what I'd become to him, a burden to be hidden away. I didn't move, didn't speak. I listened. "We can't afford a nurse forever," Clara continued. "The assisted living home in Ridgeview has space. They'll take good care of her." That line, "take good care of her," stabbed deeper than any insult. It was the same phrase people used for broken pets they couldn't keep anymore. Daniel didn't respond right away. I could hear the weight in his silence. He loved me. I knew he did. But Clara had her ways, subtle manipulations, sweet poison wrapped in charm. Finally, he sighed. "Maybe you're right. I just want what's best for Mom." That's when my world cracked. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every shadow felt like betrayal hiding in the corners. I stared at the family photos on the wall, Daniel, as a little boy in his school uniform, smiling, clutching my hand. I remembered the promise he once made at his father's funeral. "Mom, I'll never leave you alone." And now his wife had him convinced I was too old, too fragile, too much trouble. The next morning, I acted as though I hadn't heard a thing. I made them breakfast, as usual, scrambled eggs, toast, and the coffee Daniel liked. Clara smiled politely, all perfect teeth and fake sweetness. "Morning, Mother," she said. I replied just as politely, masking the storm brewing inside me. But something in her eyes told me she already thought she'd won. Over the next few days, the house began to change. Subtly, my independence was being chipped away, one small decision at a time. Clara started handling my mail just to make things easier. She reorganized the kitchen, claiming she wanted to help me reach things better. My favorite teapot disappeared one day. She said she accidentally dropped it. Every night, I felt more like a guest in my own home. Then one afternoon, Clara arrived with glossy brochures. She spread them out on the dining table like she was showing off vacation resorts. "Look, Mother, these places are lovely gardens, activities, nurses on call. You'd make friends your age." I smiled faintly, though my blood boiled beneath the surface. "So kind of you to think of me, dear," I said softly. "But this house is my friend. Every wall here remembers my life." She laughed lightly, but I caught the flicker of irritation behind her perfect facade. That laugh was the sound of a plan being delayed, not defeated. Later that night, when Daniel came home from work, I could tell Clara had already spoken to him. He looked uncomfortable, pacing by the window. "Mom," he began carefully, "Clara and I just want what's best. Maybe you'd like a place where you can relax and not worry about anything." I put down my knitting and looked straight at him. Relax, Daniel. You think I don't relax here? This is my home. Your father and I built our lives here. You took your first steps in that hallway. He couldn't meet my eyes. It's just temporary, Mom. Maybe a few months till we figure things out. I smiled bitterly. Temporary, my son? Once they move you out, you never come back. You think I don't know how this story goes? He didn't answer. And that silence was louder than any confession. That night, I cried quietly into my pillow. Not because of the betrayal, but because of the fear of losing my home, my dignity, my freedom. I had seen women my age fade away in those homes. They went in strong and came out empty. But I wasn't going to be one of them. I decided then and there, if they were planning to outsmart me, they'd learn that an old woman still knows how to play the game better than the young. Over the next week, I pretended to grow weaker. I dropped things accidentally, repeated questions, even feigned confusion over dates. I knew Clara was watching, observing, noting, probably reporting every little detail to Daniel. I made sure she believed her plan was working. Then, one afternoon, I called an old friend, Margaret, a retired lawyer who owed me a favor from decades ago. "I need your help," I whispered into the phone, quietly. Margaret arrived the next morning disguised as a casual visitor. We had tea in the garden while Clara was out running errands. I told her everything. She listened carefully, her sharp eyes narrowing. "Leave it to me," she said finally. "If they want to move you, they'll find the house doesn't quite belong to them anymore." That sentence was my first breath of hope in weeks. Because what Clara didn't know was that the house, though it stood in Daniel's name on paper, had certain conditions attached. Legal conditions. And I still had the original documents hidden where no one would ever think to look. For the first time in months, I slept peacefully. But fate wasn't done with me yet. The next morning, I woke up to find a man standing at the front gate, a tall, clean-shaven stranger, holding a clipboard. "Good morning, ma'am," he said politely. "I'm here to do an inspection for the transfer papers." Transfer papers? I froze. So it had begun. Clara wasn't wasting time anymore. And as I watched him walk toward the porch, clipboard in hand, a thought struck me cold. If I didn't act now, I'd lose everything within days. I smiled at the man, forcing calm. "Of course," I said softly. "Come right in." But inside, my mind was already spinning. They thought they were moving me out of my home. They didn't know I'd already started moving them out of my life. The man with the clipboard had the kind of polite smile that hides sharp teeth. "Just routine paperwork," he said as he stepped inside, glancing around like he was already measuring where the next owners might place their furniture. His shoes left faint marks on my polished wooden floor, and I hated him instantly for it. "Transfer papers?" I asked sweetly, pretending to sound confused. "Oh dear, I didn't know Daniel was selling the house." He smiled awkwardly, flipping through his folder. "It's not exactly a sale, ma'am. It's a transfer of care responsibility. Sometimes families do this to make sure an elderly relative's assets are properly managed when moving into assisted living." I felt my heartbeat in my throat. So Clara had already moved ahead with it. I offered him tea, which he politely declined. Then I asked him to wait while I fetched a document. I went straight to my bedroom, locked the door, and knelt by my dresser. Beneath a loose floorboard, wrapped in an old scarf, lay the envelope I'd hidden years ago, the original deed, signed by my late husband and me. It stated clearly, "The house cannot be transferred, sold, or mortgaged without my living consent." I ran my fingers over his handwriting. "Oh, George, you always knew how to protect me, even after all these years." I returned to the stranger, my voice calm, my face lined with dignity. "Perhaps you should take this back to whoever sent you," I said, handing him the document. "It might save them the embarrassment of legal trouble." He scanned it, frowning. I see. I'll need to verify this with my supervisor." "Of course," I said pleasantly. "Do tell your supervisor that Mrs. Whitaker doesn't like uninvited guests. He left in a hurry, and as soon as the gate clicked shut, I finally let my hands shake. But not from fear, from fury mixed with satisfaction. That evening, Clara returned home all smiles, her perfume entering the house before she did. "Mother, I hope you had a quiet day." "Oh, yes," I said softly. "Just a small visit from a gentleman with a clipboard. He mentioned something about a transfer." Her smile froze. "Transfer? Oh, that must have been a mix-up." "Of course," I replied, meeting her eyes. "Everything these days is a mix-up." She avoided me for the rest of the evening. Daniel sensed something was wrong but didn't ask. I could tell she was already trying to cover her tracks before I told him, but I had no intention of confronting her yet. Not until I had every piece of her little puzzle figured out. The next few days, I began to play my role with precision. I acted more fragile, sometimes pretending to nap mid-conversation. I even forgot to turn off the stove once, making sure Clara saw the pot boiling over. Her eyes lit up, almost relieved. I knew what she'd do next. She needed evidence to justify what she was planning, and I was going to give her just enough rope to hang herself with. That Sunday, Daniel took her out for lunch, and I used the quiet hours to prepare. I called Margaret again. "It's moving faster than we thought," I told her. "They've already sent someone for inspection." Margaret's tone sharpened. "Then it's time for phase 2. Remember what we discussed?" I smiled. "Yes, the will and the trust transfer. Good. I'll file it tomorrow. Just keep playing along. Let her think you're unaware." I hung up, feeling a thrill I hadn't felt in years. There's something powerful about being underestimated. It's the best disguise in the world. That evening, Clara came to my room with a cup of tea. "Mother, I've been thinking," she said, sitting on the edge of my bed. "You've done so much for us. Maybe it's time you had a little rest. There's a lovely place called Ridgeview Home. They have gardens, music nights, even private rooms." I smiled faintly. "And who will take care of my roses, dear? They bloom only when I talk to them." Her smile tightened. We'll find someone. Don't worry about the house." Ah, there it was, the phrase again. "Don't worry about the house." I reached for her hand gently. "Clara, dear, you've been so kind. I'm lucky to have you." Her eyes softened just enough for her to believe me. "You are, Mother." When she left, I whispered to myself, "Not as lucky as you think." The next morning I accidentally left my bedroom door slightly open and my phone screen glowing on a banking page. Clara couldn't resist. I saw her reflection in the hallway mirror as she crept closer, eyes scanning the phone. She thought she was clever, pretending to tidy my dresser while she peeked. What she didn't know was that I had left the wrong account open. It was an old one, nearly empty, deliberately placed there as bait. My real accounts had been moved weeks earlier with new signatories and passwords. When she left the room, I couldn't help but smile. The fish had bitten. That afternoon, Daniel came home early. I heard them arguing quietly in the kitchen, Clara's voice low but angry. "She's hiding money. I know it. She's not as frail as she acts," Daniel sighed. "Maybe she just wants her privacy. Can we drop this, Clara?" "No! She's manipulating you." The irony of that sentence nearly made me laugh out loud. That night, I wrote a letter. Not an email, not a message, a handwritten letter sealed with wax, just like old times. It was addressed to Daniel. I tucked it into my sewing box, where I knew he'd eventually find it, especially if something ever happened to me. It began simply, "My dearest son, if you are reading this, then I was right about the woman you married." Days passed, and Clara grew restless. Her patience wore thin as her schemes began to unravel. She started slipping, forgetting her own lies. She'd say one thing to me and another to Daniel, and I could see confusion flickering across his face. Then came the day she made her biggest mistake. She hired a nurse without telling me or Daniel. A kind young woman named Lydia showed up at my door one morning with a bright smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitaker. I'm your new caretaker." I blinked. "Caretaker? I didn't order one." "Oh, Mrs. Whitaker," she said gently, "your daughter-in-law arranged it all. She said you were struggling to remember things." My lips tightened. "Is that so?" That evening, Clara walked in, looking triumphant. "Isn't Lydia wonderful? She'll help around the house so you can rest." I nodded sweetly. "Yes, dear, I'm sure she will." But as soon as Lydia left for the night, I called Margaret again. "She's brought in a nurse," I said quietly. Margaret chuckled. "Perfect. Keep her close. Sometimes the best witnesses are the ones hired by the enemy." And I did exactly that. Lydia, bless her innocent heart, had no idea what she'd walked into, but she was about to become my greatest ally, because in a house full of lies, it only takes one honest soul to make the truth explode. And that explosion was coming very, very soon. Lydia arrived every morning at 9 sharp, a burst of sunlight in my dim, suspicious house. She had one of those smiles that could melt stone, gentle, patient, unbothered by the tension that always seemed to hang between me and Clara. She'd hum while preparing my tea, wipe the dust off photo frames, and chat softly about her little boy, who loved drawing superheroes. At first, I kept my distance. I didn't know if she was part of Clara's plan or just another pawn. But within a week, I realized something. Lydia saw things, really saw them. She noticed how Clara's voice changed whenever Daniel was near, how her tone dripped with honey in his presence but turned sharp as vinegar the moment his car drove off. One afternoon, I caught Lydia standing by the kitchen door, pretending to wipe the counter while Clara spoke on the phone. Clara's voice was low, but tense. "Yes, Ridgeview Home. She's stubborn, but it's almost done. We'll finalize the financial transfer once the medical report's ready. My heart froze. Medical report? When Clara ended the call, she caught Lydia's eyes for a second. The girl quickly looked down, but I saw that flicker of awareness. Clara muttered something about staff privacy and left the room. Later that evening, Lydia approached me quietly. "Mrs. Whitaker," she whispered, "do you trust your daughter-in-law?" I gave a bitter smile. "My dear, trust is a word that lost its meaning in this house a long time ago." She hesitated, then said, "She asked me to take notes on your behavior. Things like confusion, memory lapses, coordination. I thought it was for your safety, but—" She trailed off, eyes uncertain. "But now you know better," I finished softly. "She's building a case." Lydia nodded. I didn't want to believe it, but yes. That night, I couldn't sleep again. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that follows betrayal. I got up, wrapped my shawl tighter, and walked to the window. Outside, Clara's car was still parked under the oak tree. She hadn't gone to bed. She was sitting inside, talking on her phone, her face lit by the glow of the screen. I could almost hear her planning my disappearance. The next morning I played along as usual, sweet, fragile, forgetful. But when Lydia arrived, I slipped a small note into her pocket as she poured tea. "Do not speak. Read this later." In that note, I told her everything, the overheard conversation, the legal papers, the inspector, everything Clara had tried to do. And at the end, I wrote one request. Help me expose her, but do it quietly. Lydia didn't say a word that day, but her eyes told me she understood. 2 days later, Clara called a family meeting. She wore a sympathetic smile that made my skin crawl. "Mother," she said, "Dr. Harris reviewed your recent tests, and he's concerned. He thinks you might be showing early signs of dementia." Daniel looked at me, alarmed. "Mom, what tests?" Clara spoke quickly. "Just standard memory assessments." I wanted to be sure before we made any decisions. I folded my hands calmly. "Decisions? My memory seems fine to me, dear. I recall everything I've heard, especially the lies." Her eyes flickered, but she held her composure. "It's for your safety, Mother. We can't take risks." Before I could respond, Lydia cleared her throat softly. "Actually, Mrs. Whitaker has been doing just fine. I've seen no signs of confusion or decline." Clara shot her a glare sharp enough to cut glass. "Lydia, that's not for you to determine." Daniel frowned. "Wait, Clara, did you ask Lydia to evaluate my mother?" "I asked her to observe," Clara snapped, her mask slipping for a moment. "Someone has to." That was the first time Daniel's loyalty wavered. I could see it in his eyes, doubt creeping in. It wasn't much, but it was enough for me to know my plan was working. After that day, Clara's behavior shifted. She became more cautious, more watchful. She started locking her drawers, whispering on calls, and pretending to be the perfect daughter-in-law again. But the problem with pretending is it cracks eventually. Lydia became my silent accomplice. She started recording little things. Clara taking my letters, Clara hiding documents, Clara making secret calls. Nothing loud or dramatic, just evidence, piece by piece. And as for me, I prepared Act 2 of my quiet rebellion. I invited an old neighbor, Mr. Jennings, for tea, a retired notary who'd known my husband. I told him I needed his witness signature for a few documents. He didn't ask questions. He just nodded and helped. By the end of the week, the new trust was sealed, giving control of the house not to Daniel or me, but to a third party Margaret's firm. That meant no one could touch the property, not even my son, until my passing. When Clara found out, it was almost poetic. It happened one morning when she came into my room, holding a stack of letters she'd obviously snooped through. "Mother, what are these papers from Margaret?" "Oh, those?" I smiled sweetly. "Just old legal updates. Nothing exciting." Her face twisted. "You're lying." I looked her dead in the eyes. "And you're projecting." Her lips quivered. "Daniel will hear about this. I'm counting on it." That evening, Daniel confronted me, holding the same papers. "Mom, why did you change the trust? Clara says you don't trust us anymore." I looked at him gently, tears brimming in my eyes. "I trust you, Daniel, but you've forgotten who you are. You're my son, not her puppet." He stood there, torn between guilt and confusion. "Mom, please don't make this harder." "Harder?" I whispered. "Daniel, she's trying to take everything your father built. I can forgive your silence, but not your blindness." For the first time, he didn't defend her. He just left the room, silent, shaken. When the door closed, Clara appeared behind him, eyes blazing. "You think you've won, old woman," she hissed under her breath. I smiled faintly. "Oh no, dear. Winning comes later." That night, I found Lydia in the kitchen, nervously fidgeting with her phone. "Did you get it all?" I asked softly. She nodded. "Everything. The phone call she made to Ridgeview, it's all recorded." I touched her hand. "Then it's time." She looked at me, frightened yet proud. "What are you going to do?" "End this game," I said quietly, but not with shouting. With silence, the kind that ruins reputations. The next day, Clara woke up to a new reality she hadn't anticipated. A visit from a lawyer, a notary, and one very calm elderly woman who smiled as if she'd already seen the ending of the story. Because I had, and I knew Act 3 was going to be my masterpiece. The morning light streamed through the lace curtains, soft and deceptive, as if the house itself wanted to pretend nothing was wrong. But the tension was thick enough to choke on. I sat at the dining table, my teacup trembling slightly in my hands, not from weakness, but from the storm I knew was about to break. Clara walked in, dressed immaculately in her pale blue blouse, lips painted a careful shade of rose. Her mask was flawless, but I could see the panic twitching behind her smile. "Mother," she said, her voice honeyed, "Daniel mentioned you wanted to speak with a lawyer today. What's all that about?" "Oh, nothing alarming," I said calmly, setting down my cup. "Just some final paperwork, dear, you know. Making sure everything is in order for when I'm gone." She laughed nervously. "You're not going anywhere, Mother." I smiled faintly. "That's what worries you, isn't it?" Before she could respond, the doorbell rang. She froze. I got up slowly, as if the sound were nothing unusual, and opened the door. Margaret stepped in, poised, confident, holding a slim folder under her arm. Beside her stood a man in a dark suit, his notary seal glinting in his hand. Clara's face paled. "What's this?" "Just friends dropping by," I said cheerfully. "You don't mind, do you?" Daniel came down the stairs at that moment, still in his office clothes, looking uneasy. "Mom, what's going on?" Margaret smiled politely. "We're here to review Mrs. Whitaker's property documentation. It seems there have been unauthorized inquiries regarding transfer of ownership." Clara's jaw clenched. "That's absurd." "I was only trying to make things easier for her." Margaret opened the folder, pulling out a few sheets. "Then you won't mind explaining this." She laid down a printed email, Clara's own message to Ridgeview Home, requesting a priority transfer and attaching financial details for the sale of the house. Daniel's eyes widened. "Clara, what is this?" Clara stammered. That's not what it looks like." I spoke softly, each word deliberate. "It looks exactly like what it is, dear. You were planning to send me away and take my home. You'd already started the process. I warned you I wasn't as frail as you thought." Her face flushed red. "You can't prove anything." "Oh, but I can," I said, turning to Lydia, who had been quietly standing in the doorway. "Show him." Lydia stepped forward, phone in hand, voice trembling but steady. "Mr. Whitaker, I recorded your wife's call with the Ridgeview administrator. She said, and I quote, 'My mother-in-law won't last long there. Once she's in, we can liquidate the house quietly.'" Daniel's face drained of color. "Clara." For the first time, she didn't have a rehearsed answer. Her mouth opened, then closed, her perfect composure cracking like glass under heat. "Daniel, listen to me. It was just planning. I wasn't going to—" "You weren't going to what?" he interrupted, his voice breaking. "Steal from my mother? Put her in a place she didn't want? Lie to me?" She reached for him, but he stepped back, disgusted. Margaret closed the folder with quiet finality. "I believe that's enough evidence, Mrs. Whitaker. We can proceed with formal protection orders and estate security." Clara's voice trembled. "You can't do this. This is my home, too." I looked at her with cold pity. "No, dear. This was never your home. It was mine, and you were only ever a guest who overstayed her welcome." The silence that followed was suffocating. Even Lydia looked down, shaken by the rawness of the moment. Daniel sat at the table, burying his face in his hands. I had never seen him look so lost. My heart ached for him. Even through the satisfaction of victory, I walked over and rested a trembling hand on his shoulder. "Daniel, I don't blame you. Love makes fools of us all, but blindness is a choice." He lifted his eyes, wet and red. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I thought she was trying to help." I nodded softly. "I know, my dear. I know." Clara was still standing, trembling with rage and humiliation. "You think this is over? You think you've won because you humiliated me in front of him?" I gave her a sad little smile. "I don't need to win, Clara. I just needed you to lose your mask." Margaret's assistant quietly handed me a new set of papers to sign. With each signature, I felt years of fear and manipulation wash away. Clara watched every pen stroke like it was a knife twisting in her chest. When it was done, Margaret turned to her. "For your information, Mrs. Whittaker has legally secured this property under independent trust protection. Any attempt to tamper, sell, or coerce will result in prosecution." Clara's eyes filled with hate. "You think I care about your stupid papers?" "Oh, you will," I said gently, "because those papers make sure you'll never touch a single brick of this house again." Daniel stood slowly. "Clara, pack your things." Her head snapped toward him. "What?" "You heard me," he said, his voice low but firm. "You've destroyed every ounce of trust I had left." Her composure finally shattered. She lunged toward me, tears streaking her face. "You did this. You turned him against me." I didn't flinch. "No, dear, you did that yourself." Daniel grabbed her wrist gently but firmly. "Enough. Please, just go." She looked at him one last time, something between fury and despair in her eyes, and then stormed out of the house. The door slammed so hard the windows rattled. For a moment, everything went still. The ticking clock, the faint rustle of the curtains, the hollow ache of what used to be a family, it all hung there in the silence. Daniel turned to me, voice shaking. "Mom, how did you know?" I smiled sadly. "A mother always knows when her child's heart is in danger." He took my hand, his grip warm and heavy with guilt. "I should have protected you." I squeezed it gently. "No, my son. Sometimes it takes losing something to remember what protection means." Lydia quietly left the room to give us privacy. Margaret closed her folder, nodded at me, and whispered, "You did well." When everyone was gone, I sat back in my chair, staring at the empty doorway where Clara had stood moments ago. The storm had passed, but peace didn't rush in right away. It just hovered there, uncertain, fragile, and deep down, I knew the story wasn't over yet, because people like Clara don't disappear quietly. They wait, they plot, they return, and when they do, I'd be ready. But this time, I wouldn't need deception or tricks. I'd have truth on my side, and that is the sharpest weapon of all. The weeks that followed felt strangely peaceful at first. The house, once echoing with tension, finally breathed again. I could hear the birds outside, smell the roses blooming by the porch, and sleep without that dreadful feeling of eyes watching me in the dark. Clara was gone, or so I thought. Daniel tried to patch things up between us. He came home early every evening, cooked dinner sometimes, even laughed again like the boy I used to know. I wanted to believe it was over, that the storm had passed. But there was something hollow in his eyes, guilt, that wouldn't leave him. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch sipping my tea, Lydia approached me with an uneasy look. "Mrs. Whittaker, I think you should see this." She handed me her phone. On the screen was a message anonymous, but clear. "You may have won once, but this isn't over. People forget old women can't fight forever." My hands trembled slightly. "When did you get this?" "Last night," Lydia said softly. "It came from a number I don't recognize, but I think it's her." I nodded slowly. "Clara. The woman might have been gone physically, but her bitterness lingered like smoke in every corner. She wasn't the kind to accept defeat gracefully. That night, I made sure the doors were locked twice. Daniel noticed my unease. "Mom, you don't have to worry about her. She's staying at her sister's place in the city. She won't bother us again." I gave a faint smile. "You think so, my dear? I've lived long enough to know snakes don't stop hissing just because you cut the grass." He sighed and kissed my forehead, but I could tell he was trying to convince himself as much as me. Days turned into weeks, and just when life began to settle, small, strange things started happening. Mail went missing. Lights flickered at odd hours. Once, I found the front gate open in the morning, though I clearly remembered locking it. Then came the worst of it, Margaret called. "Mrs. Whittaker," she said gravely, "there's been an attempt to access the trust account. Someone tried to impersonate your signature." My heart sank. "Do you know who?" "We're investigating. But the handwriting, the phrasing, it's too familiar to be coincidence. I didn't need her to say it. I already knew." That night, rain lashed against the windows. Daniel was working late, and the house felt too big, too empty. Lydia had already left for the evening. I sat by the fireplace, clutching my shawl, trying to read, but my eyes kept drifting toward the window, and then I saw it, a figure standing just beyond the gate, an umbrella tilted low, face obscured. My pulse raced. I stood up, heart thudding, and moved closer. The lightning flashed for a brief second, and I saw her, Clara, soaked, pale, and furious. I froze, every part of me trembling with disbelief. She didn't move, just stared through the glass, her expression blank and ghost-like. Then, without warning, she turned and disappeared into the darkness. By the time Daniel returned, the street was empty. He searched the neighborhood, but she was gone. "Mom, maybe it was your imagination," he said gently, worry in his voice. I shook my head. "No, Daniel, a mother knows when danger's watching her again." The next morning, Lydia found muddy footprints near the back door. "She's been here," I whispered, staring at them. "She wants to scare me," Margaret advised, filing a restraining order. Daniel agreed, but I hesitated. Part of me wanted her to come again to see me strong, unbroken, and ready. But fate didn't give me that choice. 2 days later, Daniel's office called he hadn't shown up for work. His phone went straight to voicemail. My blood ran cold. Hours passed with no word. Lydia stayed with me, trying to keep me calm, but I could see the fear in her eyes too. It was after midnight when we heard the car pull into the driveway. I rushed to the window, relief flooding through me until I saw it wasn't Daniel driving. It was a tow truck. The driver stepped out, looking uneasy. "Ma'am, are you Mrs. Whittaker? We found this car near the old bridge. No driver inside. Keys still in." I staggered, clutching the edge of the door. "Where's my son?" He shook his head. "Police are searching the area." I felt the world spin. Lydia grabbed my arm, guiding me back to the chair. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear anything else. Hours later, the police arrived. They told me Daniel was found not far from the car, unconscious, but alive. Someone had struck him from behind. His wallet was missing, but they believed it wasn't a robbery. Deep down, I didn't need proof. I knew who had done it. When Daniel woke in the hospital, he was dazed, bruised, and confused. "I was heading home," he said weakly. "Then I saw her, standing by the road. I stopped to ask what she was doing there, and then everything went black. I sat beside his bed, holding his hand. She's crossed the final line, Daniel." He nodded weakly. "We'll stop her, Mom. I promise." But I wasn't waiting for the law this time. No, I had a better plan, a quieter, sharper one. A week later, I called Margaret and Lydia. "I want to end this," I said firmly. "No more fear. No more running." Margaret sighed. "What are you planning?" "Something she won't expect," I said. "You both will be there." It took 2 more days to set it all up. The house, once again, became a stage. Every letter, every document, every recording was neatly arranged on the table, and when the knock finally came at dusk, I knew it was her. Clara stepped inside, rain-soaked and desperate. "We need to talk," she hissed. I smiled calmly. "Yes, dear. Let's—" Her eyes flickered toward Margaret and Lydia standing behind me. "What's this?" "Just witnesses," I said softly. "I thought after all your sneaking around, you might appreciate a little honesty." She sneered. "You think this scares me?" "No," I replied, leaning forward. "But what's about to happen, Will?" Lydia pressed play on her phone, and Clara's own voice filled the room. Every lie, every plan, every cruel word about me, about Daniel, about the house. She froze, her confidence draining. "You recorded me?" "No." "You gave me everything," I said quietly. "Your arrogance did." Margaret handed her a folder. "You'll sign these documents. They confirm your legal separation from Daniel, your forfeiture of any claims, and your acknowledgement of attempted fraud. Or we go public with these recordings and the evidence." Clara stared at me, trembling. "You wouldn't." I looked her straight in the eyes. "Try me." She stared at the papers, then at me, her lips quivering, eyes glossy with rage and shame. And then she signed. When she left that night, she didn't look back. The next morning, Daniel returned home, pale and weak, but safe. When I told him it was over, he just sat beside me quietly, eyes filled with tears. "You saved me, Mom," he whispered. I smiled softly. "No, my dear. I just reminded you who the real enemy was." But as I watched the rain fall outside, a quiet thought haunted me. Some storms never truly end. They just wait for another season to return. And deep down, I knew this wasn't the last I'd hear of Clara. For a few blissful weeks, the quiet returned. The air in the house felt lighter, freer, as if every wall had finally exhaled after months of suffocation. Daniel was recovering well, Lydia visited every morning, and Margaret stopped by with new paperwork that officially sealed everything. Clara was gone. Her signature was on every document, her deceit exposed, her control shattered. But peace, true peace, always has a way of testing you before it stays. It began one afternoon while I was watering the roses. I found an envelope tucked under the pot, no address, no name. Inside was a single photo, a picture of me taken from outside the window as I sat reading in the living room 2 nights earlier. My hands went cold. The note scribbled on the back said, "You can lock doors, but not fate." That night, I couldn't eat. I barely spoke. Lydia noticed my silence but didn't press. She helped me to bed, checked the locks, and left quietly. But even as I lay under my blanket, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching. The next morning, Daniel found me sitting by the window, eyes swollen from lack of sleep. I handed him the photo. "She's back," I whispered. He examined it, his face grim. "No, Mom, she's in custody. The police arrested her 2 nights ago for the attack at the bridge. She won't be coming here again." My breath caught. "Arrested? But how?" He sighed. "The investigators matched her car to the scene. They found her fingerprints on a wrench near where I was attacked. For a moment, I didn't know what to feel. Relief? Justice? Sorrow? Perhaps all 3. The woman who nearly destroyed our family was finally facing consequences. But something about it didn't sit right. Clara was many things cruel, manipulative, ambitious, but she wasn't careless. If she wanted to hurt Daniel, she wouldn't have left such obvious traces. That night, as rain whispered against the glass, I sat by the fireplace again. The flames danced, warm and golden, but my heart felt uneasy. I replayed everything in my mind: her last visit, her trembling hands signing the documents, her haunted eyes as she walked away. There had been something strange in her voice that night when she said, "You'll regret this." Was it a threat or something else? Days passed, and slowly the fear began to dull. Daniel went back to work. Lydia continued her routine, and I started knitting again, though my fingers had grown stiffer with age. Life, as they say, crept back to normal until the phone rang one evening. "Mrs. Whitaker?" The voice was unfamiliar but firm. "This is Detective Harmon. We need to ask you a few questions regarding Clara Whitaker." My chest tightened. "Has something happened?" The pause on the other end chilled me. "Mrs. Whitaker, Clara was found deceased in her holding cell early this morning." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. My throat dried up, and I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. "Deceased? How?" "An apparent suicide," he said softly. "But there's something odd. She left a note addressed to you." I felt my knees weaken. "To me?" "Yes, ma'am. It simply says, 'He knows more than you think.' Does that mean anything to you?" I whispered, "No," though my mind was racing 1,000 miles an hour. When I hung up, I sat there, the receiver still warm against my hand. The fire crackled beside me, casting long, quivering shadows on the wall. "He knows more than you think." Who was he? Daniel? Someone else? That night, I barely slept. Memories rushed through me like ghosts. Daniel's strange silences, his sudden change of heart, his insistence that Clara had been arrested too easily. And the photo under the flower pot, what if it hadn't been from her? By morning, I was trembling not from age, but from realization. I called Margaret and asked her to come over at once. When she arrived, I locked the door behind her and handed her the note. She read it carefully. This doesn't sound like something Clara would write in despair. It sounds like a message. I nodded, my breath shaky. A warning. Margaret frowned. Do you think, Daniel? I interrupted her before the thought could even finish. He's my son. Yes, she said gently, but love doesn't erase truth. That evening, when Daniel came home, I watched him quietly. Every movement, every look, every word. There was a distance in his eyes I hadn't noticed before, a restlessness. He tried to smile, but it didn't reach his face. Mom, he said softly, sitting beside me, I want you to stop worrying about all this. Clara's gone. You're safe now. Safe, I repeated, the word tasting hollow. Tell me something, Daniel. Did you know she was going to the bridge that night? He froze. Just a second, but it was enough. His eyes flickered, then quickly looked away. Of course not, he said too quickly. Why would I? I leaned forward. Because she called you, didn't she? Before it happened? He turned to me sharply. Who told you that? My heart broke as I looked at him. You just did. He stood up, pacing. Mom, you don't understand. She'd lost control. She was threatening to ruin everything to take the money, to disappear with it. I just wanted to talk to her. I never meant for any of this to happen. Tears filled my eyes. Daniel, what did you do? He ran a hand through his hair, shaking. I didn't hurt her, I swear. But I knew she'd planned to hit me that night, so I confronted her first. Things got out of hand. She fell, hit her head. I panicked. He broke down, covering his face. I called the police anonymously. I told them where to find her car. I thought if she was arrested, at least no one would know what happened. But then she turned up dead. I felt the room spinning. The betrayal. The lies it hadn't just been her. It was him too. My son. The boy I raised. The man I thought I'd saved. I wanted to hate him. But all I felt was sorrow, a deep, aching sorrow that wrapped around my bones. Why didn't you tell me? I whispered. He looked at me, broken. Because I couldn't bear for you to look at me the way you're looking now. The silence between us was unbearable. I turned away, tears slipping down my cheeks. Get out, Daniel, please. He hesitated, but I didn't repeat myself. I couldn't. When he left, the door closed with the finality of an ending I never wanted. Weeks later, Lydia found me sitting in the garden, staring at the roses. You haven't spoken to him? She asked gently. I shook my head. A mother can forgive a lie, Lydia, but not a truth that kills. She placed a hand on my shoulder. You did what you had to do. I nodded slowly. Maybe. But the price of survival is loneliness. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I looked at my home, the one I fought so hard to keep. It stood tall, strong, eternal. But it no longer felt the same. Every corner whispered with ghosts, every wall carried secrets. Clara was gone, Daniel was lost, and I was still here, victorious perhaps, but hollow. Sometimes, outsmarting your enemy doesn't make you clever. It just makes you the last one left standing in the wreckage. I leaned back in my chair, watching the evening shadows creep across the garden, and whispered to the roses, You were right, George. The worst betrayal doesn't come from strangers. The wind rustled through the petals, soft and sad as if answering back, and for the first time I let the tears fall freely because the war was over. But victory had never felt so much like loss.